we'll just get a couple of moves into this game anyways. We'll start off, and then we'll just see if anybody kind of moseys in. So this should be. Let me see. Make sure of that. Okay. So this is the game. So we got Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana. Magnus is white. Plays the move D4. Don't worry, folks. There are a whole book full of novelties for both of these players. Moves that nobody in the world has ever seen before. Moves that nobody has ever played before in a tournament game. Sitting in their brains, just waiting to uncork these brilliancies. And if one or the other should stumble into them by chance, then we're going to see some fireworks. We are going to get into some mainline stuff. Magnus is not afraid of the Petrov's defense. So we're going to have a chance to see some more interesting games. Whoops, what is this? That's the wrong one now. Okay, we're back on this one. We're going to have a chance to see some really interesting games. We're going to see some E4, some D4. Who knows what kind of wacky stuff we're going to find. We could find a B3, or who knows. We could find all kinds of wacky openings in this championship match. But Carlsen's going to mix it up early, and he's going to save his best stuff for a little bit later. So we'll see how this goes down. So today's game was a D4 opening. Knight to F6, Knight to F3, considered the most flexible. And then comes the move D4, D5, C4, E6, and Knight to C3. And so now we have ourselves a very standard and classical Queen's Gambit decline. So if there's any beginners out there, I'm sure you know that. If you don't know that this C pawn is the so-called gambit pawn, why they call it the Queen's Gambit. But in reality, it's just not a very good gambit in that, it's not really technically a gambit in that black can't really hold on to this pawn. There's no actual way that black can hold on to that even gives him equality. It's just a bad position. And there's all kinds of like nice tricks and traps you can go look up on the Queen's Gambit declined. So at any rate, or on the Queen's Gambit, but at any rate, he declines it, which is a common, very common opening, very stodgy. I play this opening myself. And here in this position, after bishop to e7, sometimes the move order can be just slightly different. For example, you can have d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to c3. And in this line, if black plays knight to f6, there's an extra option for white of playing pawn takes. Pawn takes and pawn takes. Now in this position, they can do, for example, let's say bishop to f4. The plan is they're going to play e3 at some point in time, knight to e2, and then play knight to g3. They might even just play e3 immediately. Again, with the intention of having that extra option to play the knight to e2 and then to g3. It's a different kind of a setup, and the plan is to go for a quick kingside attack. I don't think it's a very good plan for white, but it is real. It's a real and viable opening. So in order to avoid that, if black wants to, they can also invert the move order by first playing, after knight to c3, they can play bishop to e7 immediately. And this is my preferred line. The difference is that now after pawn takes and pawn takes, after whatever, whether bishop to f4 or e3, now there's the extra option of playing the knight to f6 and bringing the knight out to e7. So the knight is not committed, so there's this extra option, this extra square for the bishop to go to. So that's just a little tricky line that's playable. But in this particular opening, that opportunity never arose, and so we found ourselves in this position. Now the knight is committed on f3, and the knight is committed on f6, so everything is fine, and everything is fine and dandy. So oftentimes, if you're playing the black side of a Queen's Gambit, you want to make white commit that knight first before you play this. If white is delaying playing knight to f3, probably they're just hoping to trick you up to get into that line, so just keep on delaying, and you already know what their plan is. If they don't play knight to f3 immediately, getting ready to castle, then you know something fishy is going on. So yes, transposed into a Queen's Gambit declined, KB. Whoa, how does Queen Gambit decline transpose into a Queen's Gambit decline? So this is a Queen's Gambit. This is a Queen's Gambit decline, but it didn't have to necessarily be. It could have been, in this position, like for example, c4 didn't even have to be played. You could play something completely different. And also on d4, black can just play something completely different, and now you're just gonna have yourself a Slav. So it does not have to be a Queen's Gambit declined in this particular move order. Okay, so e3, C5, this is the best and the most active move. I don't play this line, mostly because I always get into trouble in these lines, and I don't know, like, there's a lot of, like, the problem is that there's a lot of pawn levers, and you gotta kind of clear them off quickly and in the right order. If you don't do it in the right order, then that tension just stays there forever, and every time you make a move, you gotta re-look at every one of the captures. It's very time-consuming, and it's quite technical. It seems like it's not that big of a deal, it's so early in the game, but you have to make those captures correctly. You can really get yourself into trouble. You can end up with an isolated pawn. You can even lose a pawn if you play this line wrong. So the move that I normally play is c6. And c6 also prevents later moves like knight to b5, which is actually not dangerous. To give you an example, I think I've got this line here. If c5, let's say knight to b5 immediately, and the threat is that I want to come into the c7 square. So here, for example, c takes d, knight to c7. Let's just say, for example. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that rook. Well, you're going to get in all kinds of trouble here. Black has a lot of initiative. First of all, he's just going to take here, so he's going to actually get a knight in the pawn, because your knight's going to be trapped in the corner, first of all. So f takes, bishop to b4, check. This is already in black's favor. King to e2 just gets out of the way. Whoops. King to e2. E5, very strong move. Bishop takes e5. Knight to c6. Knight takes a8. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. And queen to e7. And after knight to f3, just for example, bishop to c5, but any number of moves attacking that e-pawn, white is going to have some big problems. He can't get his knight out of the way. In fact, it might almost be good for white to just jettison this knight right now and just try to survive this somehow, because this is already a really disgusting position. Queen to d2, for example, knight to e4, queen to d3, and here in this position, you know, I don't know, maybe something like just simply take this pawn. This is like lights out. This is a disgusting position. Queen takes, maybe I could play knight here. Pawn takes, I got queen. Check. Guess we gotta do this one first. Anyway, so that's that kind of a thing. So look at how, like, what is just totally crushed. So obviously a grandmaster is never going to allow themselves to get off kilter like that. So these guys know that activity means more than material. Activity is always the key to chess, folks. And so that's why those kinds of lines don't work. So you can play c5, but that's a pretty long and convoluted line to try to get into. So I can understand why somebody would be scared of it. And I've been known to get in trouble, not so much on the c7 square, because I'm familiar with this e-pawn push. I'm familiar with that tactic. Very aware of that tactic. But more along the lines of I end up getting into trouble on this diagonal, on these squares, somehow. So I like to avoid those things, and I play c6, but it's considerably more cramped. And although I've scored pretty well with it, you know, it makes me uncomfortable, and so I don't like these bishop to f4 lines. I much prefer the more active bishop to g5 and get into a Lasker variation. Whoops, where are we here? Which goes like this with bishop to g5, castle, e3, h6, bishop to h4, and here now the move knight to e5. This is a more active and interesting opening for me. I'm not afraid of bishop takes, queen takes, and then I'm going to have my queen on a very active square. Some lines it will even go from a6, from e7 to a3 one day on an exchange of knights or something like that, and it can cause a lot of trouble on these weakened pawns. So I'm very familiar and comfortable with these positions, and I find that it's just a more active position. I also feel it's better for white. I feel like white has better prospects. There's a large number of lines after bishop takes and queen takes. There's a large number of lines. One guy tried this against Vladimir Kramnik and got totally destroyed. This position here with e5 coming. Another possibility is bishop to d3. My personal line is knight takes, pawn takes c4, and after bishop takes, I play b6. But there's better lines than this. But this is just a good line that I've scored very, very well with myself. I'm going to put the bishop here, and the knight on d7, the rook's here and here, and I'm going to push my c-pawn. The better lines than that are to play queen to c2, where after knight takes, you can do queen takes, forcing c6. Or even better than that probably is rook to c1. And on knight takes, rook takes, again, c6. And these lines can continue on for quite a while. Very interesting positions, chances for both sides. Okay, so let's go back to this game now. C5 and D takes C5. Let's just see what you guys are up to in convos. Well, of course, coming in with Master Puppets. I'm not going to complain about some Metallica. Always nice. This is the hip-hop instrumental. So the song requests aren't coming on right now. The reason for that is because I want to post this video later. I want to post videos of all of my commentary on the games. And so I would like, hopefully, to have music that won't get muted. So hopefully this won't get muted. Are you guys with me so far? So you got D takes C5. I believe this is the best move. There's a number of different captures and even leaving the tension like that. But this is the most common move as far as I know. Pawn takes, bishop takes. So white still has a couple of pawns, or black still has a couple of pawns in the center. A nice long, safe pawn chain. But these pawns are not static, so they can move forward at some point in time. The downside is there's no weakened pawn on d4 or weakened square on d4 because e3 was played instead of e4. So the d4 square is quite safe. So it's a flexible line for both sides. We have queen to c2. I mean, I guess queen to c2 is threatening like pawn takes d5 or something. If pawn takes, knight takes, and I'm attacking the bishop on c5. If pawn takes, and queen takes, I can just play rook over to d1. And black's already getting kind of tied up in knots, having difficulty holding on to his bishop on c5. So queen to c2, knight to c6. This is a bit of a This is a bit of a problem here on b4, so white takes care of that immediately. a3, the correct move. And then comes the move queen to a5. This concept of moving the queen to a5 is just the thematic idea in general. So obviously b4 doesn't work because I can just take it with whatever. Probably even just take with the bishop is better due to the pin on the pawn. So this is a thematic idea, and he's going to take advantage of this temporary situation, the pin on the king. So white plays rook to d1. White could probably castle here as well, but I wouldn't want to castle. I would prefer to castle on the king side still, and so did Carlsen. I'm not sure which line the computer would like better, or if there's like if they're like separate like book lines or whatever. But rook to d1 seems thematic. Rook to d8, bishop to e2, and knight to e5. So now he's going to really take advantage while he still can. It's his last chance before white castles. Take advantage and play this knight to e5, and Magnus Carlsen castles. So we find ourselves in this situation, and black takes the knight. Now, before we go any further on this, and if you're just tuning in, guys, thank you for joining me on the Trout Show. We are taking a look at Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana. Hopefully you guys can kind of hear me. The mic's in a weird place. So I hope you guys can kind of hear me. Trying really hard to speak close to the mic area. Here we have a situation where pattern recognition is handy. Of course, these guys have seen these positions a million times. This is their normal book. They're still well within their book. Fabi is totally 100%, folks. He is in his opening theory still at this point in time in the game. Now, in this position, you might wonder what's the best way to recapture this. Am I supposed to take this back with the b pawn, or am I supposed to take this back with the queen? Irregardless of what the play was in the game, what do you guys think about this position? Would you be more comfortable to take back with the queen, offering a possible trade of queens before having your pawn structure messed up like that? Or would you rather take back with the b pawn and leave the queens on the board, knowing that your pawn structure is a little shattered? Hey, Bear Twitch, what's up? KB Khan saw the match. I mean, I'm assuming most of you guys did, but I'm just curious. I'm not asking you guys what the move the players played, but I'm asking you, what do you think is the best move in this position, and why? Like, why would you want to take with one piece or the other? Because it's a choice, and this kind of a tactic is very common. This is a very simple kind of a motif that happens a lot, especially in Queen's Gambit. It can happen in any opening, and I'm going to show you a game where something like this happened to me when I played Alexei Shirov. I played Alexei Shirov, and he was playing the black pieces, and in a totally different opening, in a totally different scenario, a very similar situation happened where I had this same choice to make. Do you take back with the pawn, or do you take back with the queen? And while we're waiting for responses, let me just put on my my clock tick. There we go. That's how those sound effects are available. Some of them for free in the panel right underneath the screen, so you can go check those out, guys, as well. Okay, so let me show you the game that I played against Shirov that came to a similar position. Again, it's not the position itself. It was a totally different opening. Kingly says leave the queens on. The pawn would be doubled anyways, so the pawn. If low on time on bullet, I'd exchange queens, says Bear Twitch. Harlem Knight just subscribed the tier 1 sub. That's 6 months in a row. That is a green badge, baby. Harlem Knight coming in. Boom! What is up? Let's give the man some love for his 6 month subscription. I can't believe you've been on for 6 months, man. Look at this guy. There he is. Man, you're not going to find a better guy than this. Cheers from the trout, my friend. Let's rain some love. My first love bomb of the day. And really, I should love bomb, the Kingly Bingley and KB Khan for coming in early and keeping me company, guys. While we get this stream on a roll, Kingly especially been a really good friend in the community who I admire a lot, and I learn a lot from his streams about how to run a good show. So there's Kingly Bingley. Let's put that one on. And we're also going to put out Harlem Knight. Boom. There you go with that. Throwing some fish up in the air. I appreciate that, guys. Okay. So let me show you guys, and I've shown this game a couple of times on stream, so I'm not going to go over the whole game. I just want to get up to that point in time. This is me versus Alexei Shirov, Grandmaster, and at one point in time, World Championship contender Alexei Shirov. I don't believe he ever got his shot because nobody would put the money down. Nobody would put the money down, which was very unfair. Possibly because Kasparov had totally owned Shirov over the years, but Shirov at his best was close to 2,800, and that was in an era where we didn't have 60 guys ranked 2,700 and up. So this was my game. I played white. It was e4, c5, totally different opening. There's not even a queen's pawn opening. d4, pawn takes, c3, and this is called the Smith-Morra Gambit. Shirov declined it by playing knight to f6, attacking my e-pawn. I pushed, and after knight to d5, I did queen takes. A slightly unusual line where I get to protect my pawn while also attacking the knight temporarily on d5. So he plays e6, I play knight to f3, guarding my e-pawn. Knight to c6, queen over, and he played d6, which is the old main line. It's now considered a little bit better to play the move f5 here. After d6, I played c4, a bad move, blocking in my own bishop. He played the interesting move knight d to e7. He's going to unfold his knight through g6, forcing me to capture with my e-pawn, otherwise lose it. So I played knight to c3, knight to g6, pawn takes, bishop takes. I was getting desperate to castle here, so I played bishop to e2. He played f5, chasing my queen around, and then e5, continuing to bully me around in the center. I played bishop g5, queen to a5. Okay, here we see again this theme, even though there's no knight to come to e4, just this theme of attacking the knight like this. I played rook over to d1, attacking his bishop. He played bishop to b4, castle, and here he took my knight, and I was left with a very similar choice as in the Carlsen-Fabiano-Caruana game today. Now the question is, again, what should I be taking this back with? Because this is a common position. No matter what happens, if black wants to, he can mess up my pawns. It's not as bad as it looks, okay? It's not so easy to take advantage of these two pawns. They actually cover a lot of ground, okay? So they're fairly well defended. And I also get to use the open B and D files for my rooks. The main question is, what do I want here? Do I want the queens to be off of the board, or do I want the queens on the board? It was Alexei Shirov. I did not want Alexei Shirov to have his queens on the board, and so I chose to take back with the queen in this position. He took my queen, and after pawn takes, he castled, and the game continued on from this point in time. The only comment that Shirov made to me after the game was he questioned my choice. He asked me, why did you take that back with the queen instead of with the pawn? And I was a little bit shocked by that. I thought, wow, I just didn't want you to attack me. Like, I just didn't want you to have such a heavy piece around all of my messed up pawns. And he was the one who demonstrated to me that it was better that you keep the queens on the board. My queen has more activity on c2 than his queen had on a5. And because I'm the defender, I'm the one defending these pawns and he's the one attacking them, I have the prerogative to move away, he doesn't. If he moves away, then I don't have to do anything. Nothing happens. I can do whatever I want. I can move my queen anyways. But if I can make a useful move with my queen, I can abandon those pawns temporarily by creating a bigger threat someplace else and threatening to put his queen off the board. And it's a big beginner's mistake to start going around with your queen and just picking off pawns. It's called pawn grabbing, and it's a big, big blunder. It's not something you want to do unless you have a viable reason for it. Don't go running around with a lone queen taking pawns while you're still underdeveloped. Let's go back to the chat here, see what's going on. No, this was not the game from Washington Square. No, the game that I played in Washington Square, I'm pretty sure was against the guy who was the inspiration for the Lawrence Fishburne character in Searching for Bobby Fischer. And Roman Djindjiashvili happened to be there that day, but I did not play Roman Djindjiashvili. I played that other guy. And I won those games, but that was a different situation. No, this was a simul against Alexei Shirov, maybe about, I don't know, 2007 or something like that. So anyways, so the idea was that instead it was better for me to take like this. Again, this queen is a little bit out of play, and these pawns are not a big deal. They're already guarded, and there's no way to attack them again. So it was better for me to keep the queens on the board and keep that option open to move the queen away, while this queen cannot move away, because if this queen ever moves away, it's lost any attack anyways, which was the whole point of why I was scared to leave the queens on the board, was for it attacking my pawns. It turns out that's not a threat. So getting back now to the main game, here in this position, after 11 or after 12 castles, and black played knight takes c3, Magnus Carlsen took back to the pawn. Magnus knew what to do. He knew that this was the correct path. Even though it was a very different situation, that principle is still there. That it was better to leave the queens on the board. Now, first of all, the queen takes the pawn is a complete blunder because of just rook to a1, and the queen is trapped. So that part was pretty simple for a guy like Magnus to figure out. If the bishop takes, I feel like the same kind of thing's going to happen. The rook's just going to come here, and then he's going to play the queen up, and this bishop's going to be lost as well. So Magnus chose the correct path. Hey, Zed Nation, what's up, man? Taking a look at the Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana game today. Game 2 of the World Championship. The first game was drawn in dramatic style after Magnus was absolutely crushing Fabiano. Couldn't hold on, ended up in a pawn-up ending as black, which was a draw. And this was game 2 from today. It was a queen's pawn opening, queen's gambit declined. So here in this position, h6 was played. Look at these beautiful, steady, stable pawns. Everything very safe. Black's big problem right now is that he's got a bishop that's on the inside of the chain. That's a little bit of an annoyance. So he's got to watch out for issues with that. He doesn't want to fall behind in development. But other than that, there's no real substantial targets. Everything's looking quite safe. Lots of picky pawns to work against at some point in time. So it's not going to be easy for white to gain any advantage in this position. The move a4 was played. I don't really get this move, if I'm being honest with you. I don't really know why that was played. I mean, was it because he was hoping to play rook to b1 and then to b5 or something? I'm not really sure why now exactly he chose to play that. It could be that he had intentions of playing the move e4 and then try to reroute his black squared bishop back around to a3. It's possible that there could have been some concept like that he was keeping an eye out for. But I'm not really sure. And let's just turn on the computer for a quick second and see what the computer says. We've got, let's see. The computer does like a4. We're just taking a look at a game right now. Kaspersky, maybe a little bit later, I might play some games or something like that. Oops, what's going on here? What just happened there, guys? Oh, dude, did I just come on, guys, what just happened here? Did I just lose my game here? Oh, that's real nice. Well, I guess I know I have to turn off challenges now when I want to analyze. We just lost our game, guys. I don't know if somebody has the PGN handy, but I've just lost my game because of that challenge. That sucks. That sucks, man. I'm gonna have to find out how to turn off my challenges, because that really annoyed me. Okay. Alright, well, I guess that's the end of our analysis, guys. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that, Kingly Bingley. I actually went there and tried to do that today, and I couldn't find it, and I had to one by one input that game manually. I almost made a backup of it just in case of something like that happening. It's in there now. Hey, swing it up. No, we were looking at the World Championship game from the game 2 from earlier today. And I went to click X on a challenge, and I guess it erased my game for some reason. So guys, just don't issue me any challenges, please, right now. If you could do me that favor, and we'll try to get this game back up. Because apparently, if I click on anything outside of the game, it will mess up my screen. Yeah, I'm not gonna. If somebody can find that PGN, we'll take a look at it again. Otherwise, I guess we're done with our analysis. That's too bad. That's too bad. I mean, I can try to remember the game, but I don't know, man. It seems like a long shot. Seems like a long shot. C4, E6, knight to C3, bishop to E7, bishop to F4, castles. E3, C5, D takes, bishop takes, queen to C2, knight C6, A3, A3. Thanks for throwing the fish up, guys. Appreciate you sticking around anyways, even though we lost the analysis. It happens sometimes. I've already done that, Swing Kid ad. There's no such thing there. Like, unless there's a big red button that says click here for game 2. Usually when you go to that site, it just shows you the last game played, but that's not the case. Instead, it's a completely blank board, and it's like a countdown saying 1 day and 6 hours till game 3, and it's a blank board with no PGN. And even if you can find the game, there's still no PGN. You have to pay or sign into their site in order to be able to even get the PGN. So if there's a place that you can get the PGN, I'm all ears, man. I tried really hard to find it. I had to input every one of those moves manually by hand. So it was A3, queen to A5, bishop to... No, that's not right. It wasn't bishop to E2. It was the rook move. Let's promote that. It was the rook move, rook to D8. Now the bishop, the knight, castles, knight takes, pawn takes. Is this about right? Pawn takes H6, and then came A4. So we were at this position. And in this position, I believe during the game that Fabi played the move knight to E7, which is a pretty nice little technical move. You can put it here, or you can put it in my DMs or something. Wherever you like, Kingly. I think you got mod modes, right? Yeah. So you can just you can just put it wherever if you got it. I don't have Discord open right now because it makes little like blorking sounds. But if that's easiest for you, I'll open it up for a second. So knight to E7, I'm pretty sure was the move played anyways. This is a nice little technical move because here's the problem is that it's round 1. Okay, no problem. Swing Kid, did you send the link? Swing Kid sent the link on Discord. Okay, let me try and take a look at that. If you're just giving me the link to the channel, like I don't want to do that, Swing Kid. I already told you I've just been there. I was literally there like less than 5 minutes before I started my stream. I started my stream 10 minutes ago. So I find it hard to believe they've changed something in 15 minutes. And I can't even get into my... I can't even click the open button on Discord because I'm in the small window. So yeah, I'm just gonna skip that. We'll just play it by memory as far as we can go. So it was knight to E7. The reason for knight to E7 is it prevents the move. The move knight to E5 is coming. It's usually kind of a nothing move. But Black has an idea of how he wants us to go down, and he would prefer not to be in a situation of being forced to take back on the C6 square or whatever. And plus there's also potential little dangers. It's the only real weak point on the board is F7, just because it's kind of naked over there. There's no real pieces around right now, and there's a couple of 3 pieces potentially that could get onto that square: the bishop, the knight, and the queen. But Fabi is in his preparation, and he has no problems with this. He already knows what he wants to do. On knight to E5, the move bishop to D7 was played. And basically, again, how you can tell Fabi is still in his preparation is because he's rattling these moves off really quickly. So Swinkita says he's got the link for the second game in Discord, but I still can't do it. Can you just post it here, Swinkita? Or in my DMs? Okay, let's see this one. Maybe Kingly's got this one now. Okay, again, it's in my small window. Why is it in my small window? some way I can like, oh boy. Is that the one? Okay, that might be the one there. I'm so stupid with technology, and I'm on one monitor, guys. So you have to bear with me, man. I'm a complete idiot with technology. No, this is still game one. Okay, so bishop to d6 was played. And white played the move pawn takes pawn with a little trick in mind, but immediately on playing that, Fabi takes back with the knight. Here's the trick. Fabi already had analyzed this position and knew exactly what was going on. We're 16 moves into the game, and Fabi is just in his stone-cold book element. He knows every move that's been played so far, and he's already analyzed this knight sack, and he's not afraid of it. I just clicked on it too, man. That's the same one I clicked on, Swing Kida. Okay, so here's the move. Here's the situation, guys. On knight takes pawn, there's this trick that black has to be careful of. Knight takes pawn. If bishop takes, I think queen to g6 is dangerous. Again, you see why it's okay to leave the queens on the board, because white's making a direct threat, you don't have to worry right now about these pawns. You might just want to take this rook anyways, but just to say that those are the kinds of things that are coming up. Now, if the king takes, we have the bishop check on h5. Can't play g6 because the queen's on that as well. If the king comes back, there's bishop takes and rook takes. And now something like maybe c4 or e4. So this was a trick that black had to be really careful of. Black has to be really careful of this. It turns out that it's fine, but it's something that he had to be aware of. Now in this move order, maybe it might be best to play queen c7. And if the e4 pawn pushes, I think maybe just knight to f4. Yeah, like I can take this, but then this is coming anyways. Maybe even queen takes. But I think I would rather do the knight takes because I don't want to leave this rook on the back row. That would be a big problem. Okay, cool. Kingley says he's found the PGN. It's good just to make sure, especially in the tricky rook and pawn endings. That, to be honest, I think I actually could remember this game because it's still pretty fresh, so we should be okay. But if we have the PGN, then we can make sure, because it's a World Championship game. I want to make sure we're all right. Shuba says click on the link and then click on game 2. Maybe Shub, there was more than one game on the same link. Was that a possibility? Because when I clicked on it, you guys saw it just started playing the Sicilian from game 1. But maybe there were more than one option. Anyways, it's fine, man. It's fine. So that was a little trick anyways that black had to be careful of. But because Fabi knew this position, when the pawn took, he immediately took back with the knight. And he's basically saying to Magnus, you know, like, don't even waste your time. Don't even waste your time because it's not going to work. And so now without that tactic, and now Magnus now realizing that tactic doesn't quite work, he was forced to play into a line that's very drawish. So black is already completely equal here. Black has no problems really on this board. If that shot on f7 doesn't work, nothing works. So, okay. So we've got knight takes d5. And then he played, no, that's not what happened. He didn't play knight takes f7. Oh, I see, it's because I don't have the PGN again, right? So instead, I think here he played the move bishop to f3. So this is definitely not what Magnus wanted. If he's forced into this line, it's very drawish. Of course, Magnus being who he is, he finds some little tricks, but Fabi just had no problems in this game. He was technically perfect, I thought, in this game. Right, and then came knight takes and pawn takes. The other possibility here was he could have done bishop takes and bishop takes and keep his knight on the d5 square for a little while. Maybe he can try to like make some action one day. We have here Valorant is making a splash. What's up, Valorant? Welcome to the Trout Show. We've got a little crew out there now watching. I've lost my PGN. We're looking at the game from the World Championship, and I've lost the PGN. Some people are shouting at me and getting irate in the chat and saying, "Oh, it's here, go to your Discord, blah, blah, blah." I don't have time for any of that. I'm just like on one monitor, and I'm not going to like open up my whole expanded monitor with all my personal information. So like, you know, for like, you know, your leisure and stuff, if you don't have the link and you can't clearly put it in, and when I open it, it's game 2, then I don't want to see it. I don't care. We're just going to do this for memory. And then we're going to get into a little bit of games, and we'll just do some chat and stuff like that. So I just don't send me any challenges right now because it's messing up my board. When I tried to click out the board the last time, it just suddenly reset my whole position. So that was really annoying. I'm just really stupid with technology. So like, cut me a break. Okay. So bishop to yeah. So this is a possible line that could have happened. I think the line that Fabi chose was again technically superior. Does knight takes and pawn takes, and then here in this position he does bishop takes. Again, you can see here a demonstration for some of you who are kind of noobs at chess. You'll see here a demonstration of why, another reason why earlier in the game when we had the chance, it was a good idea to take back this knight on c3 with the pawn and keep the queens on the board, rather than take back with the queen and have the same pawn structure but with no queens on the board. So this queen's not really doing anything substantial to threaten the pawns. It never did. But here's an example of a kind of a line that could go wrong. So let's say, for example, pawn takes. Now if queen takes, then he's going to lose his rook on d8. So he doesn't want to do that. So let's say that black decides, okay, I'm going to take that rook first, and then when you take back, boom, I'm going to steal your pawn. Now black's up 1 pawn. But oh no, rook to d1 is coming, and not only is it check, but the king can't even come to the h2 square because of the queen that's still on c2. So the queen maintains its usefulness on the c2 square, and in this situation that would be a mate. Okay, this one works. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, this looks like the right game. Okay, it looks like we're in business, guys. It looks like we got the correct game. Good, good. Thank you, King Lee. You are a gentleman and a scholar, and so are you, Shub. Thank you very kindly. All right, we're in business, guys. So here was that situation again where I was talking earlier. This is an instructive lesson. You ever find yourself in this situation, what comes up a lot? The game that I showed was from my game against Alexei Shirov, where a similar situation happened, where there was this possibility of recapturing with either the b pawn or the queen. And it was a completely and totally different opening, so it's an instructive lesson that if you find yourself in that situation, it's better to take back with the pawn, even though you might want to take away your opponent's scary-looking queen, hovering around your dangerous pawns. It's better to take back with a pawn, leaving your queen on an active square where you have the prerogative to move away, but your opponent doesn't. Because if your opponent moves away, then it's as if there was never any threat. So in order to maintain the so-called threat on your pawns, that queen has to stay where it is. Okay, so let's just fast forward back to where we were, so everything's fine here again. So in this line, it was rook takes. Oh, we actually did the rook takes first. Okay. So that's good that we caught this because it was actually rook takes. We would have had to go back a couple moves. So rook takes, queen takes, and pawn takes. All right. And then comes queen to c7. rook to b1. I mean, the rook on b1 is covered by the queen, so I suppose that if the queen takes on e5, we're just going to do bishop takes. Yeah, so around here in like the beginning of the rook and pawn ending, it got kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys had any comments on some of this. Harlem's lurking. Thank you, Harlem, for hanging around, man. I was in the arena with Harlem that Harlem put on earlier today. Always puts on a good show, my friend Harlem. Yeah, so it was kind of a sterile game. So the rook comes over, the queen comes to d3, and then the move bishop to c6, and here the move a6. I'm not really buying this move. I don't really buy this move. I think it's a tricksy move, and Carlsen is doing too much of this. All year he's been doing this. Magnus Carlsen is getting too fancy. I feel like he's bored with chess. It's almost like, you know, everybody has their rival, you know. Capablanca had Alekhine, and Steinitz had Zukertort, and Fischer had Spassky, and Kasparov had Karpov, and Korchnoi had Karpov, and everyone always has this rivalry, but there's not really a single person who is pushing Magnus to get better, and I think he needs that. And I wonder if he's just kind of bored with winning so easily all the time, and he plays a little flashy sometimes. And moves like this are not necessary. This is overly aggressive, and he did the same thing in the last game. He played an unnecessary h-pawn push to h4 in the last game in a critical moment, and blew his lead. So he pushes this pawn. I think he probably should play queen to d4 here. Try to take advantage somehow of these pawns and leave this e-pawn on the board, cramping black for as long as he can. Even if it's just one more move. Magnus takes up soccer next. I mean, that wouldn't even surprise me because his previous coach was Simon Agdestein, who was a multiple-time Norwegian chess champion, and he was also on their national soccer team. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. So a5, bishop to c6, queen to d6, queen takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and king to f8. This position is already a dead draw. And there's some really cool tricks, and I bet you that if I was playing Magnus Carlsen, that I would somehow lose this game. Because he comes up with some clever tricks, and Fabiano had to be technically perfect. c4, a nice little finesse move. Before he pushes his a-pawn, he wants to push c4 to give him an extra avenue of attack, and so that he can connect his pawns before the king gets there. The king comes over to e1, the pawn push to a6, b6, and c5. Taking advantage of this pin on the b file. But black's not having none of that. He just plays his king over. Now this pawn is extremely weak. This is a backwards pawn. Backwards pawn means that there's no pawns on the adjacent files that can be used to protect it. So it's a weakness. The pawn takes, and now he has two pawns that are going to fall, and there's nothing he can really do about it. If he doesn't do anything, this is just going to take, and then he's going to play here, and this pawn's going to be gone. So he must push, rook over, rook takes, and king to g2, and now he's going to focus on these 3 against 4 pawns. If black is able to make a passer somehow, this game's going to be over, but unfortunately it's just too many obstacles to get through right now. He's not going to get a chance to do that. They've got the money, they've got the girls. What do they care? This is swing kidda. So e5, rook to b4, and this is just a technical position. Magnus knows this very well, but Fabi still has to play carefully. He's going to try to go for the win because he's got the extra pawn. He's really got nothing to lose. so why not? But I think this move is a mistake. I think he has to slow roll it. I think he has to take this pawn, run back over this way, play g6, go and hide his king, and one by one slowly walk these pawns up while White shuffles this rook back and forth. Torture White for as long as you can. By playing this move, f5, we're going to get into the same kind of a structure as what we had in the first game. Again, very different position. This is not even the same player. This is a different player, but still with the black pieces that's up one pawn. But what happens is that this rook laterally controls the king and the motion of these pawns, so that they can't go too far because the perpetual either threats on the pawn directly, either direct threats on the pawn, or checks on the king or cutting off squares for the king. So on rook to b6, king to e6, and then he jettisons the pawn with d7. So again, White is just gonna go back and forth on those rows until the king becomes too far advanced, and then it will become sort of a spin-off of a Philidor's position, where once the pawn gets, let's say, to the 6th rank, the rook is just going to come behind to the back rank and then check the king laterally along these, or vertically along these squares. So there's no way to get out of this mess, and the way that he finds to finish this game, to get this, to solidify the draw, is quite original. I really like this position. He plays king takes, and then rook to b5. Nice little move. Nice little move, taking advantage of this situation to attack that pawn immediately. So the king comes forward, the rook checks. The king goes back to f7. If the king chooses to go forward, then the rook will check again. So king here, rook check, the king can go forward again, the rook will check again, and no matter where the king goes, at some point in time, the rook will always end up back on this juicy square on b5. And this pawn is going to either drop, or he's going to have to put his rook behind it, and all of the pawns are going to be frozen. They're not going to be able to make any progress. So the king comes back, the rook check, the rook to b5, the king comes to f6. Again, if the rook comes over to e6, probably in this line I would even play f4. The white rook is too active. And so let's say, for example, king to f6, rook b6, rook e6, pawn takes, king takes. Maybe you can throw in f4, but probably you're just going to play like either just rook to b7 or the rook check. And the white king controls the queening squares for all three of these pawns. They're gonna queen on these three squares. The white king controls those squares, therefore, even with the pawn down, this is going to be a textbook draw. Yeah, Fabi's pawn structure. Yeah, Fabi did really good today. I mean, he was never, Magnus hasn't been in any danger, ever, so far in this tournament, so that's one thing against Fabi. At some point in time, Fabi's going to have to choose to go for a win. He's going to have to find a way to get some wins out of these positions. He doesn't want to be in a situation where he comes down to the last game or two and he's down one game against Carlsen and now he has to play aggressive for a win. He does not want to have to be forced into that situation. So if he gets any winning chances, he has to take them while he can. But in this particular game, Fabi was never in any trouble, so that's a very encouraging sign for him. He was very well prepared, better prepared today than Carlsen. So just to finish this game off, the rook comes to b5, the king to f6. The rook goes to b6, the king goes forward to g5. Folks, don't try this at home. Generally speaking, you do not want to chase your king forward, chase your opponent's king forward so that it traps your own king. You know, that's the last thing you want to do. You're going to get checkmated if you do that normally. But this is Magnus Carlsen, so he can do whatever he wants. So he plays the rook move again, the king goes forward to f4, and now white gets what he wanted, which is to play rook to b4, forcing the pawn push unless black wants to just go back and repeat moves. Pawn takes, and h3, a nice little finesse. These are beautiful little sophisticated rook and pawn endgame moves. A nice little move. These two squares are now forming a wall that this king cannot get through. So that this king, if it needs to, can come back around to the other side of the f pawn without having the fear of reprisal from the king against his f and h pawns. So the rook comes forward, rook down to attack the b pawn. Once again, he can now attack vertically as well as laterally. The rook comes over to g5. The king does indeed come back. Once again, the king can't come through because of that clever move h3. If the rook ever comes over, just king back to g2. So the rook goes back. He's going to just try to keep the king cut off. Maybe with the hopes that he can somehow play like this, but it's not going to work. The rook comes here to attack the pawn immediately, and that's the end of that plan. The rook's just shuffled a couple of times, and that was the end of the game. And that is going to be a draw. And the funny thing is, if you turn on Mr. Silicon, here's a little hint, ladies and gentlemen. The computer, folks, it is not always right. It is not always right. We turn on the computer, and it still thinks that black is better. I actually thought it was going to say more like 6 or 7 or 8 tenths of a pawn. It's saying 0.3 pawns advantage for black. But ladies and gentlemen, this is an absolute, total, stone cold, textbook, dead draw. So that was your game today, folks. Fabiano versus Magnus Carlsen. Tomorrow is a rest day, and then they start again on Monday with Game 3. It is a 12-game match, long time controls. In the event that there's a tie after 12 games, they will go to a rapid playoff, then a series of blitz, 2-game blitz mini matches. And then if it's still tied after that, they will go to the Armageddon tie break, which I was mentioning to Harlem and Brooklyn recently as an interesting time control to solve a tie break. You can't hold this position playing white. I mean, it's rough, KB. It's definitely rough. I mean, I know these positions very well. I'm really good with rook and pawn endings. I wouldn't want to have to play this against either one of these guys myself. I really wouldn't. I felt more scared in this game than in the previous game. I thought that I could have more easily defended the other game. But in actuality, there was a number of very clever moves that Magnus Carlsen made in that rook and pawn ending, where there was one and only one response that Fabiano could come up with, and everything else was clearly worse. He did that several times in that rook and pawn ending, in that 114 move draw, and of course Fabi found the correct moves. But just to say that it was that close, it was that fine of a line he had to walk. Basically, this black pawn is just dead in the water. I mean, you can like come back over this way if you want to. Like you could come back over here or something. But I'm just going to keep on attacking like this. And if you ever move forward, I can either just go back to where I was, preventing your pawn from ever going forward, or I can even come this way if I want to. Because you're not going to be able to come anywhere forward. So because you have to go backwards, I get to make progress with my king. And I'm controlling the queening square, so you can't make progress with these pawns. It's kind of a paradox of chess that when you're trying to queen a pawn, you actually want to put your king or your rook in front of the pawn so that you can control the square that the queen is eventually going to land on. The pawn is going to turn into a queen.